The Chicago Bulls are one of the world's most recognizable brands and one of the only pro sports teams actually taking risks in Web3. Today on the show, we're going to intertwine two different storylines about the Bulls and crypto. The first one is about the NBA, its scrappy roots, and its growth to being such a fun and incredible league today. A league worth billions. Like if you literally add up how much each team is worth, it's about like $75 billion, which is insane. And the other story we'll follow is about one of the league's most valuable franchises that has the enviable but also very high-pressure task of managing one of the world's most recognizable logos, and how despite the Jordan years and being the fourth most valued franchise, the highest selling in merch, and literally the NBA's first real mega brand, they actually operate in a way that's true to the NBA's roots, and when you take an even closer look, might just be true to the ethos of crypto. In a world where corporations are very tight with their logo and bent on maximizing profits, the Bulls really do just want their brand to be for everybody and to do Web3 the right way. What's up, everyone? It's LG Doucette, and you're listening to The First Mint, a podcast about Web3, business, and sports. Before we get to the show, a word from our sponsors. Digital collectors and creators, listen up. The Gaia Marketplace is your home to list, buy, sell, and trade your flow-based digital collectibles, from legendary NBA Top Shot moments to newer projects like Dimension X, where you can bring your NFTs in-game and play to earn crypto. Throw your NFTs on the marketplace quicker than ever with Gaia's bulk listing tool, then grab some popcorn, kick back, and watch the action. Head over to ongaia.com to get started. That's ongaia.com. Nothing on today's show should be considered financial or trading advice of any kind. Please do your own thorough research and make your own trading decisions. This is not advice. Now, before we get started, I have a little request from you guys. As you know, we recently revamped the podcast, and we'd really appreciate, if you're listening to this on iTunes, to give us a wee little rating and maybe even a little review, some nice words, or however you feel about the show. I want to know. As a small to like mid-tier podcast, we kind of fight for position on the charts of iTunes, and they got a very specific algorithm. And basically what we do is try and stay in like the top 50, top 100 by region. We recently changed our categories, so that's a bit of an uphill battle to kind of like prove yourself in that category. Anyways, I'd love to hear from you. Would love a little rating if you can spare it, literally just on your phone or on your computer, wherever you are. Just hit that 5-star, 4-star, 3-star button, whatever it is. Write us a little review. Let us know what you think. It would help us a lot. Okay, so we're going to start this pod off today by stating something that I absolutely did not know, and that I only found out while I was researching this show, because obviously I started looking at the finances of the NBA, where they make money, and found something actually kind of interesting about how the league started. Maybe you guys knew this. Again, there's going to be a lot of stuff on the show that maybe you guys already know, but the idea for the NBA was actually hatched in like the mid-1940s by hockey team owners who had built all these arenas for their teams to play in, but then weren't happy when the arenas were just sitting there like vacant most nights of the week. Like, again, there wasn't really like as many like touring bands and shows and stuff back then. So they built these hockey arenas and they just sat there every night, collecting dust, especially when the team was on the road. So what they decided to do is actually start a league in a completely different sport. So they went and they're like, hey, this basketball sport is pretty cool. Let's go just start our own league with that so that we have something to do in these arenas, like especially during the winter or whenever. And this part's true. Like it literally says this on the NBA website, and they spin it as innovation, not as like, hey, let's make more money, but like, hey, how fancy, how smart we were to do this. And I quote, "The NBA is a 70-year-old organization born from innovation. It was June 1946 in New York City when Boston Garden owner Walter Brown realized that major ice hockey arenas, which were vacant most nights, could be used to host basketball games." And honestly, when you look at the NBA, the teams, and how they conduct business, it actually kind of feels like all of it derives from this idea of basically like, what other cool things would people pay for, and how could we maximize that inventory that we have? Now, I don't want to spend the podcast discussing NBA history. That's a whole other topic, and there's so much there. Rather, I think while we're talking about revenue and business, we can skip forward to the modern day NBA, which this modern era starts around 2014 when Adam Silver takes over as commissioner, and how under him, basically like the NBA and other sports leagues are doing this too, is basically posting record profits across the board and being looked at as one of the most forward-thinking organizations in the world. And that's also while navigating a very particular time in sports and basketball. Like, think about it. In the last 8 years, we've seen the major adoption of social media. We've seen the social justice movement, the pandemic, multiple now owner scandals and replacements of those owners, and obviously the shift in the game to far more like shooting, team-based kind of thing. Now, what's special about Adam is that he really knows how to market the NBA, and he knows that lies in empowering the players and letting their personalities come through. And he learned that very likely in his first few years with the league. He joined in 1992, and very quickly he ascended to being the head of entertainment and actually oversaw the pitch and conception and production, or at least recording, of The Last Dance. If you guys watch that fantastic Chicago Bulls documentary about their final season with Michael Jordan, that's actually something that came about under Adam Silver. Obviously, it wasn't his idea. It was conceived by an NBA entertainment producer named Andy Thompson, but that whole idea was pitched to MJ and the Bulls a lot, like by Silver and his team, saying like, hey, basically, can we follow you around for a final season here? It's going to be great. MJ, we won't put it out without your approval. And it literally took 20 years for it to actually come out. But anyways, that was something that happened under him. So Silver, clearly somebody who understands the power of marketing not just teams, but also individuals. Like Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, and you watch The Last Dance, they kind of explain this. They became the NBA's first true like international spectacle. The first for like any North American league at all. Like, it was the first time a brand and a player extended its star power so far beyond borders and made it into a global brand. Silver was also there to see the money roll in. It's estimated that in 1998, the total value of all NBA teams was actually just $6 billion compared to 75 today. But again, that's inflation, things change, and obviously a power of marketing and making the league bigger and better. But despite the fact that the NBA teams were collectively worth $6 billion, it's estimated that in 1998, Michael Jordan alone brought in $10 billion to the American economy. So Michael Jordan, a star, was literally like 1.5 times bigger in terms of money than the rest of the freaking league. Think about that for a second. Here's a little bit more context around that. If you even just look at, let's say, not so bright spots or not so flashy star things. Look at Space Jam #1, the first Space Jam movie with Michael Jordan. It brought in $230 million at the worldwide box office, with 69% of that being international. So only 31% of its revenue was actually local, whereas Space Jam 2, New Legacy, that came out like last summer or the summer before, only did $163 million total worldwide. Like less, like it did $6 or $70 million less, despite coming out like 25 years later, more, and that doesn't even include inflation. So really, what I'm trying to do here is give you context of what Adam Silver witnessed and was part of in the 90s as the NBA created the first truly global super brand of sports. And I think as a result, although it might not be tied directly to it, we can kind of see how Silver really sees the potential in terms of maximizing the NBA's profits. Since he's taken over, let's give you just a list of the deals that he's negotiated or renegotiated on behalf of the NBA. So in 2015, starting 2015, he ended the partnership with Adidas and signed an 8-year deal with Nike worth $1 billion. The year after that, he negotiated probably the most important deal there is for the NBA, which is the TV rights, the broadcasting rights, which are worth $2.6 billion annually, a $24 billion 9-year deal that he signed with Turner Sports and ESPN that actually is actually going to run out in 2025. So it's going to come to an end pretty soon. And then there's general league sponsors, which is somebody like a State Farm that gets a sponsor like the All-Star Game and gets to run a bunch of commercials during the broadcast. That's worth, not just State Farm, but like all of those general sponsors are worth, so they say about like $800 to $900 million a year. And most recently, of course, we've seen Adam Silver allow the sponsoring of jerseys in the NBA, which they've signed a deal which is worth about $200 million in this last season alone. So that's an extra $200 million of business being brought into the NBA just from the jersey logos. So that's a 8-year $1 billion deal with Nike, 9-year $24 billion with Turner Sports and ESPN, general like $800 to $900 million from sponsors every year, and then the sponsors on jerseys worth about $200 million. million. So Adam Silver, under his tenure, has really not just allowed players to get out there, be more spoken, and kind of navigate all this new world stuff, but has also found really great ways to make the most money out of the NBA, turning it into one of the most lucrative leagues in the world. That's out of the way. What we want to talk about today is crypto, obviously, and the metaverse. On a recent episode of KG Certified, which is Kevin Garnett's kind of like specific little podcast show that he does, Adam actually spoke with KG about how the NBA approaches crypto.
I think blockchain, the technology that underlies those digital currencies, I think it opens up enormous opportunities for leagues. And think about the traditional trading card business, for example.
I was going to say Pop Shop is...
Yeah, NBA Top Shot.
Excuse me.
Right, yeah. So where it's in essence, a trading card that's become a digital product that's moved online. The old regime was a trading card company. Panini is our main licensee, or Topps is one well-known in the marketplace.
Get a piece of bubble gum in it.
You have a card. Let's say you buy that card for a few dollars. That card turns out to be valuable. It's a Kevin Garnett card. That card then trades for $20, then trades for $100, in some cases for thousands of dollars. None of those proceeds are shared with the league, with you, team, or anybody else. It's now just the trader's market. What's so amazing about blockchain, it's usually there's an attachment forever to the creator of that content. And so it doesn't mean there isn't a market to trade that card, but it means you can set your own rules. And so maybe the creator of that content.
Silver is actually pretty sharp here in this clip when it comes to crypto. And what I actually like is that he doesn't dodge the questions too much, although obviously it's a pre-organized interview. For example, like when KG asks him a very spicy question about something like an NBA coin, which is something that would make crypto people, NFT people go absolutely berserk and be like not allowed to ask that. But he asks him straight up, and Adam's response is honestly fantastic.
Enormous opportunity.
Could it be a day where we can say that the NBA will come out with its own token when the education has caught up to where people are using it and it's more volatile?
Possibly. And a few of our team owners who are super sophisticated in this area have suggested maybe there should be an NBA coin. So that's something we're looking at. I don't mind being a little overly cautious in that area. I mean, I recognize there's a lot of speculation around some of those currencies too, but so right now I'm very focused on the ways in a sort of large scale way, like with NBA Top Shot, where we can connect to millions of fans. They can experience something, they can own something, they can trade in it at the same time, use it to follow players, follow teams in the league.
So it's clear at this point that Adam Silver and the NBA are clearly way ahead of the game. And if you even just look at what's already out there for them in terms of metaverse, it's quite obvious. Like so far, they've already done like an experience of Meta Horizons, which, say what you will about Facebook and what they're doing, they're already there. The NBA already has a thing there. Teams like the Golden State Warriors have been doing VR since literally 2016. And then obviously in the NFT space, they've already brought in like major revenue in terms of licensing their content. NBA Top Shot has already done $200 million in primary sales and has already earned $50 million in secondary revenue from over $1 billion being done on the marketplace. So if you take that in context of those other revenue streams I was talking about before, it's actually pretty damn good for just 2 years of a completely new medium. Now, I'm not sure how much of that goes to Dapper Labs. They've never disclosed that. But again, just like an NBA thing, a digital like marketing avenue has done that much money in crypto is quite significant. And literally just last week, they launched SoRare NBA, the fantasy platform, which has already seen some sales, some auction sales go for like $15,000 or $20,000. That on top of a few other NFT things the NBA has dabbled in, such as 75th anniversary NFT courts that they sold last season as memorabilia. And you could say that they're honestly way ahead of any other league in the NFT space, which is clearly going to be a great place for consumers in the metaverse. And although Adam Silver didn't really discuss this with Kevin Garnett in that interview, the NBA has a pretty open policy for what teams can do in crypto, which is the opposite of a league like the NFL that is quite restricted. Like literally at the start of the 2021 season, the NFL came out and announced that none of their teams would be able to do anything in NFTs without the league's approval, clearly wanting to funnel all the revenue through their major licensed agreements. So far, for teams in the NBA with a much more open landscape, there have been a lot of great, different, interesting projects. Like the Warriors were first, naturally, in April 2021. They launched commemorative NFT sets for their past championships. The Charlotte Hornets offered tickets that were NFTs to a game literally the next month. And that's way, way ahead of its time. They were like these little like beehive things. And I don't think the integration went super, super well, but still, they were out there. And then that summer in 2021, along with many other NFT crazes, a lot of teams released keys, like little membership keys. They gave you access to seats and suites and tickets, court time, meet and greets. Among those teams, the Raptors, the Kings, the Pistons, the Knicks, and of course, the Bulls. The Bulls, which are the focus here today of the episode. So let's get into it. And again, we will reset the context. We've already talked about Michael Jordan, but that was 25 years ago. Let's take a look at how the Bulls fare in today's NBA pecking order. We'll start with franchise valuation. They are number 4, like I said earlier, at $3.65 billion valuation, and that's today. That is on the Forbes list of 2022 NBA expensive franchises. Number 1 is the Knicks at $5.8 billion. Number 2 is the Warriors at $5.6 billion. Number 3 is the Lakers at $5.5 billion. And then there's a bit of a drop with the Bulls coming in at number 4. For the curious, and obviously you can find this list just by Googling it, but for the curious, the bottom 4 are the Hornets, the Timberwolves, the Pelicans, and the Grizzlies. Grizzlies bottoming out at $1.5 billion, a full $5 billion or $4 billion, less than the New York Knicks. Back to the Bulls. When it comes to merch, they absolutely dominate. Forget these valuations or whatever that is. Clearly, The Last Dance reignited some kind of deep-rooted nostalgic interest there, because for jerseys in the 2022 offseason, the Bulls absolutely dominated. They had 3 different players from that team, from the 90s team, in the top 10 jersey sales of the entire NBA. Obviously, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman. That's how much that brand is still worth to today's NBA fans. And Lids, which is the store where you can go buy like sports caps, right? They're in the malls. You've definitely been to a Lids, even if you don't know it's called Lids. They put out a map recently of all 50 US states and showed which ones sell the most team merch. Out of those 50 states, out of the 50 states in the US, there are only 19 of them where the Bulls are not the highest sellers at Lids. That's 3 out of 5 states where the Bulls sell more merch at Lids than any other team. That's people buying the Bulls instead of their own team. And that despite the fact that the Bulls have only made the playoffs twice in the last 7 years. Now, despite all that money and jersey sales, the mentality inside the organization is actually pretty scrappy. For this podcast, to talk about the art project and everything else going on at the Bulls, I interviewed Luka Dukic, the executive director of content strategy for the Chicago Bulls, and the brain behind the Aurochs project that we're going to talk about just a little bit that launched on Coinbase just last month. One of the first things I asked Luka was how they could get buy-in internally for something like individual artist NFTs, where the league and everybody else is selling memorabilia and Top Shot and all that kind of stuff. How is it possible that the Bulls, he and his team, sold the higher-ups, the decision makers, on something like these artist NFTs? And what he told me is that the Bulls actually function a lot more like a startup than people might think, and that they're always open to new and edgy ideas.
The Bulls is interesting because it's such a global, big, worldwide, recognizable brand, but it's really a small company at the end of the day. And I think as with any like good business, like the philosophy is like hire good people and let them cook, right? Like let people like follow their curiosity and see like how it makes sense. If you can present like a good business case and like a reason as to why, I think the organization has trust in its people to kind of follow it. So it's been one of the reasons I've been with the Bulls for 7 years, is just like as a brand and company, there's like an intricate like curiosity that we want to explore things and we want to try different things. So
now, if you look at the Bulls' history and that desire to try different things, there's clearly like a relentlessness in terms of how they do things. Dating back to original owner Dick Klein, who started the team in 1966, he had actually played for the Chicago Gears, who left town in 1947, and for years after that, he tried to get and keep a team in Chicago. I'll literally name you some of the names of the teams. Again, I don't know the Chicago history, but there are the Chicago Stags, the Chicago Packers, the Gears, the Zephyrs, all teams that were in Chicago for some brief moment and then got shipped out or sent elsewhere or rebranded or just closed shop. Finally, in the mid-60s, Klein got the backing of ABC to actually try and round up money for an expansion team. And that backing of ABC, like the TV company, actually gave him the credibility that he needed to raise the money and actually get the approval from the league. So they bought a franchise for $1.6 million. That was the expansion fee in 1966. And that scrappiness clearly shaped the mentality of the team. They launched in that 66-67 season through the expansion draft. They actually did pretty well, that first team. They went 33-48, which is still a record for an expansion team in its first season to this day. But the following season, the interest fell off, and they actually had a game where only 890 people showed up, which was still not very much back then. But that didn't deter the startup mentality at the team.
I think the Bulls, when they started, was very much a startup business in a fledgling league. Like the NBA wasn't what it is today. I think they were pulling crazy marketing stunts, taking real Bulls and marching them down Madison Avenue just to get buzz around the team.
And although the franchise clearly eventually succeeded when it got to the Jordan era, and as we described, became one of the world's most recognizable sports brand, that mentality lives on even in Luka's department when it comes to things like social media and connecting with fans.
I remember we did a Snapchat movie series where we had murder mysteries on Snapchat and did all this crazy stuff that no one else was doing. And I remember being up at night being wait, what are we doing with the Bulls channels? We have we're doing a mascot murder mystery with Benny the Bull and an inflatable mascot getting deflated at a dinner and who deflated him. It was just the weirdest ideas you can think of. But we are a brand who wants to try something different. Everybody else was just doing Snapchat. Here's the players walking into the game. Here's a couple highlights. Here's the post-game press conference. It's we wanted to try something different. And so for ideas big and small, I think that the brand is willing to try things. And that's been really exciting to be a part of. With the NFT buy-in, the NFT business, I think the executive leadership at the Bulls has this philosophy of hey, we can listen to, and no idea is a bad idea. It doesn't matter exactly where it comes from. Let's talk about it, right? So they're not going to greenlight every single thing, but if you can sit down and say hey, this is what's interesting, this is how I think our brand can play in this, and this is what we want to try. I think there's an understanding that we might not know what the results will be, but there's that intricate brand curiosity of why don't we try out? And we have a powerful brand that's going to be able to make waves in different spaces. So yeah, I feel very fortunate, but it just comes down to curiosity and trusting the people that you've brought into your company.
This seems like a good time to remind everyone of what we discussed earlier, that the Bulls are in a very unique position as a brand. There is no athlete like Michael Jordan. There is no athlete who broke through that way pre-internet. And there is honestly not really much culture that transcends quite like basketball. In last week's show, I shared this data point about the top 5 athletes for Generation Z. They are Steph, Kobe, LeBron, Lionel Messi, and Michael Jordan. Obviously, Kobe is immortalized because unfortunately he passed away, and he's also quite the legend. The other 3 guys are currently around. They still play. But Michael Jordan, he's still living. He's still breathing. He hasn't played a game in over 20 years. Nothing's happened to him. And yet, he is popular with people that are 16 years old. And so for the Bulls, I wanted to know how they view their fans. Who are those fans? Do they look at young people, old people? And who are these people that buy Bulls gear instead of jerseys of their own team?
One thing I keep coming back to is that there isn't a typical Bulls fan, and I think that's pretty unique to the Bulls and the Bulls brand. So the Bulls are the 3rd most followed sports team on social media in North America, in any sport, the 3rd most followed. LG, how many of those fans do you think come from outside the U.S.?
At least 30 or 40%, right? It's the Bulls are one of the most global brands there is.
Okay, get the 70% of our following comes from outside the U.S. Not Chicago, but the U.S. So there's really a global brand here that goes kind of beyond Chicago. So when we talk about what is a Bulls fan, you have the fan who has season tickets and lives in Chicago and comes to every game, the fan who comes to all of our in-person events and festivals and everything. But then you also have fans overseas who maybe they live in France, like they've never been to a Bulls game. They might never go to a Bulls game at the United Center, but like they spend a significant amount of their time thinking about the team and following the team and repping us like in their communities.
So you're saying people are getting tattoos. You have a massive international fan base. Beyonce's wearing jerseys. Like, what with Bulls fans local across the world? What's popular? Like, what are they like? Are the jersey sales beyond every other team? Or do people really love when you guys put out like some kind of new commemorative piece or some type of new edition of hats, new city jerseys? Do people really want, I don't know, like old seats from the arena? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is the thing that it's like, man, anytime we put these on sale or we put out some kind of edition and try and exclude the art for now, because we're also going to talk about the art next. That's like, man, you know, like that's the one thing that like people go berserk for this thing that we sell or we release or whatever that is.
Gear, like to me, I think Bulls gear is maybe the most seen gear. If you go to a music festival, like Bulls gear everywhere, Bulls jerseys everywhere. When I travel overseas to visit my family, and my family is from Serbia, when I go over there, every time like I'm wearing like a Bulls gear, like somebody comments on it. Like there's this almost like you're part of something when you see like that Bulls gear all around the world. Like I went to my honeymoon in Argentina, same thing, like was wearing like a Bulls hat. Someone was like, Michael Jordan, you know, Chicago Bulls, you know, like immediately like that brand is like ubiquitous. So I think like Bulls fans have that like kind of branding thing where like Bulls gear is always cool. It's always interesting. It's always in style and people are really excited about the brand. And then you have like the culture, right? The culture of like, what does it mean to be the Bulls? Like Michael Jordan is like the coolest athlete of all time. And when The Last Dance came out, I think that just kind of underlined that, right? Like, but it's like the 90s Bulls, like that's a whole vibe. Like that's like maybe the first like international superstars in any sport. And that kind of carries over even in today, like the being a Bulls fan, wearing the Bulls logo, like that, it means something. So to me, like, it's like what's popular with Bulls fans is both the products for sure and like the brand and the logo and like the places that they see it, but it's also the culture and the vibe, which again means that, you know, you kind of have a tall task of like you want to meet that cool factor.
Which brings us to their logo, incredibly recognizable, and the story behind it goes that Dick Klein, the original owner, hired his buddy Dean Wiesel to make it in exchange for some tickets. He wasn't even paid, and per sportscasting, Klein requested specifically for there to be blood on the horns, which I actually never realized that that's what it was. If you look at the Chicago Bulls logo at the tips of the horns, there's blood. That's blood. It's not just extra red coloring, like it's actual blood. And even if you look at Benny the Bull, the lovable mascot, he also has blood on the horns. Now, Luca told me that the logo has never changed and that it's the longest tenured in the NBA, which is partially true. I actually found that there's an alt logo that was made in the 1970s that looks very similar, but it has the bull breathing out like a cloud of steam, and under it, it says Windy City. But that was only an alt. It wasn't their main one, so they have kept it for a very long time, since the start. And speaking of alternates, now's a good time to talk about how the Bulls recently had 23 one-of-one NFTs made by a mix of artists, some big, some small, in the space, and auctioned them off, with 50% of the proceeds going to artists and 10% going to After School Matters, a Chicago-based nonprofit that provides high school students with free after-school and summer programming across the arts, communication, leadership, and sports. The project, which launched last month in collaboration with Coinbase, was named the Aurochs, because an auroch is now an extinct species of bull, and Luca and the team wanted the project to represent how early we all are in the space. Although this may sound unique in the space, and it is, for the Bulls, lending their logo back to the community is actually nothing new at all.
Like as soon as social media became a thing, we wanted our brand. We had this conversation of like we want our brand to be inclusive. So if you make like a really dope piece of art, like, you know, in 2016-17, we were like, hey, like let's feature fan art on our Instagram, right? Like we were proactively reaching out to artists to do all-star campaigns for our players. Like we're not precious about like everything the Bulls put out has to be made internally by the Bulls, nor does it have to be made by like an agency or like somebody who's specifically like working for us. Like fans like are inspired by the team and have something to say. So like let's let them say it, and that's kind of manifested in many ways. We've had photographers come in and take over our Instagram by shooting games in their own style. we've never been super far from like allowing artists to kind of express themselves through our logo. I know there are a lot of brands who are like very particular about how their logo is presented, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but we feel like our logo like is strong enough to stand on its own, that it doesn't get devalued or hurt if somebody makes an interpretation on it, because the original logo stands so strong on its own. So giving people the ability to kind of play with it and play with our brand in many ways is something that's been exciting and close to our ethos for at least the 7 years that I've been here.
That project that they did recently with Coinbase, the Aurochs, brought in about 55 ETH, so about 70 grand US at the time, which is a very modest amount. They clearly left a lot of money on the table in terms of what their brand is worth, but they did work with some fantastic artists, to name a few, like Ghost, one of the biggest artists in the space, whose own collections have done over 7,000 ETH in secondary, Bobby Hundreds, who's behind the Atom Bomb Squad project, Blake Jameson, who, among many other things, designed the Knights of Degen, and Alexa Mead, who might be small on Twitter and in NFTs, but is massive on Instagram. Her art is more, think like a Van Gogh, but in real life. And this is the part with this project and everything that we heard from Luca where I'm particularly bullish on how the Bulls are doing things. It hits the notes of what we expect from NFTs and from crypto. The art is unique and premium. The community is very focused, is very involved in this, and that's clearly at the core of what the brand wants to do with their image and likeness. And also, they're using these early days to establish their brand, who they are in the space, do things that are community focused, and not try and squeeze every last dollar out of it. And although, again, doing an artist drop may not seem like anything too wild, the Bulls are setting the tone for how pro sports teams should and could enter the space. Everywhere in Web3 now, even in the bear, it feels like some of these larger IPs are really trying to cash grab us. They're really trying to maximize their profits and squeeze whatever's left out of this market that's honestly kind of dead now. And it's obvious that the NBA may also be trying to do that. But with the Bulls, they'd rather maintain their brand. They'd rather be that leader and leave the door open to the many other options and levers that they have to pull in the future, because the possibilities there are limitless, which is clearly the message from inside the organization.
So it feels like the beginning of something, right? I don't know exactly what's going to be next for us. I know we're going to be in this space. I know we're curious and interested in where this is evolving, and we want to evolve with it. So you'll definitely see more from the Chicago Bulls. What it is, I don't know yet, but I think we're going to keep learning. We're going to be listening to podcasts like The First Mint. We're going to be going to conferences. We're going to be talking to
Stop it.
We're going to be lurking in Discords. We're going to be seeing like what people are interested in and try to like kind of meet them there. Like we definitely want to be, the space changes from week to week, right? Like the way that people approach things like change from week to week. One thing I think is really interesting is storytelling. Like I know 10KTF has been one of my favorite projects to follow, and how they've kind of like built that momentum. That is really interesting to us. So I think like figuring out what's next for us is something we definitely want to do, but we want to do it in the right way. So we're going to be thoughtful and take our time in figuring out like what exactly is next.
Given Luca's response here, I felt it necessary on my end to make a suggestion in regards specifically to Benny the Bull, who apparently, according to Luca, is already a massive TikTok star. Would you ever mint moments of Benny the Bull? And I'll tell you specifically, my brother and I are absolutely obsessed with when Benny the Bull went on Jerry Springer like 20 years ago. And his girlfriend is seeing someone else, and it's the other Bulls mascot, like the giant inflatable one. And it's one of the best, like that to me is like one of the best things that the internet is for, is being able to pull that up in like 2 seconds. Will we ever see Benny the Bull moments of the best moments of his career?
First of all, I can't believe that Jerry Springer clip exists. It was one thing I found in the first year that I worked at the Bulls, and I was like, I can't believe this was like the Wild West days of like, I would love the backstory of like how that happened. So yeah, dude,
you said it. You guys are like a startup, and you want like scrappy ideas. Yes. So that to me fits. That fits.
Yes,
Bulls walking down the street in 1966, Jerry Springer 40 years later. Yes. That to me, it lines up.
Yeah, you're not wrong, man. But no, Benny's an icon. Benny is like one of the most recognizable figures in Chicago. Like it's like Benny has his own brand, his own kind of fan base. Benny, like low key, Benny has more TikTok followers than any other NBA team. Not mascot, but any other team. Like Benny is bigger on TikTok than any other team. So yeah, Benny's like a massive property, and like the team Benny is amazing. I'm sure that we just want to find the right thing that's the right voice for Benny, but like I would not be surprised to see Benny's involvement in NFTs at some point. We just want to.
What are these TikTok videos?
Yeah.
What's happening?
I don't even know.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I feel like TikTok is kind of like the natural evolution of Benny the Bull. Like he's made for TikTok.
It's so perfect, and he was early, and that's the reason like Benny is such a big following. Like before people had really like TikTok had been as mainstream as it is. Like Team Benny understood like what the vibe was of TikTok and like what the voice was, and like his vibe is like super TikTok. So it's been cool to see that, and I mean like Benny's a massive brand in and of himself, so it's pretty cool to be able to work with that as well.
There's one with his grandma. Or his mom, or whoever that is.
There's a lot of characters in the Benny universe, man. You're going to spend a lot of time falling into that.
Dude, that's so good. You're talking about storytelling, NFTs, and lore. That's exactly what we need is Benny. If he's got all these, forget 10KTF and Jenkins of Valet, man. Give us some Benny the Bull universe. Metaverse. Benny the Bull metaverse is the next thing to come.
It might be.
In conclusion, I highly recommend you keep an eye on the Bulls, and I really do hope they can continue to lead the way with Benny or more artist NFTs or whatever, because the Bulls leading the way in the next bull market, honestly, would be pretty damn legendary. Next week, we're going to talk about Artifact, a company that Nike bought just last December, and how they might be the Swish's gateway to the metaverse.